And welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. It's a pleasure to have Catherine Loubier on our program today. She was, until recently, the Delegate General for Quebec in New York City, looking after the province's trade, economic, cultural, and political interests. We'll discuss all things Quebec today, so enjoy the show. Bienvenue, Catherine.
Hey, merci, bonjour. Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Clement.
Oh, it's my honor. Tell us, I kind of described your role in my description, but tell us what you saw as your role in New York City.
Well, you know, in this role, you're the most senior representative of the Premier of Quebec in the US. So obviously, I saw a lot of challenges on the trade side under the previous administration, but frankly, under this one, it may get even more rocky. And defending our interests, really, for our industry, acting as first-line responders to our different sectors of the industry, Canadian, but also Quebec. And then promoting our companies and trade and trying to get those exports up from Quebec to the United States is certainly a very big priority. And of course, I was there during this COVID situation, though. Mm-hmm. So other kinds of challenge during that crisis, while I was in New York.
Were you called back during COVID, or how did that work exactly?
So at some point in the beginning of the crisis, they encouraged us to come back home, which I did for a brief moment and decided to come back. I had a staff of about 35 people in New York, and I felt I needed to be there. Mm. And so I decided to be there. And the first months of being alone in New York during the crisis were very difficult. At some point, there were 2,000 deceased every day in New York City. You couldn't even buy a coffee. But I felt I made the right decision at the time. And I think the locally employed people who work for Quebec in New York were happy that I was there as well. Mm-hmm.
Well, can you maybe highlight some of your successes over your tenure then?
Yes, well, we did, in fact, raise exports. I think that's extremely important because over the years, we're still, of course, exporting in a majority in the U.S. More than 70% of our exports go to the U.S. For Quebec, that's very important because we need our economy to do better and to be at par with the U.S. and even our Canadian friends. So raising exports was a matter of being out there, connecting opportunities to Quebec companies, but also making sure that on the trade side, we remain free or with less hurdles to be able to export, so counter protectionism. Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty proud of what we did. We multiplied by 10, I think, the number of exports on the U.S. side. But we don't take anything for granted. This could go, down, and we have all kinds of protectionist threats that are popping up, as you well know. The other thing is yes.
Keep going. I do want to talk about the Biden administration, but I'm going to save that for later. So let's keep giving a kind of a general tour d'horizon here.
Tour d'horizon, yes. One of these exports is our hydroelectricity, our clean hydroelectricity. Tremendous legacy that we have in Quebec in abundance and at a good price. And so my number one task, why I took this job indeed, was to succeed in increasing the hydroelectricity, which we've been exporting for 100 years on the New York side. So when I say increase, I mean long-term contract, which has never been done. And the construction of a new transmission line, which happens to be 3/4 underwater. And so this project was facing opposition. We needed a regulatory change in the state of New York to recognize our hydro as clean and also to allow for Hydro-Quebec to bid on the budget of energy for the next 20, 30 years. So we've achieved that. I'm very proud of that. It's not over yet. The call for proposal is ongoing. It should be in final stages very soon. And that is a tremendous legacy when you talk about moving the needle in terms of revenues for Quebec and contributing to climate change on the US side, but really climate change knows no borders. So it applies also to Canada and to Quebec. And finally, attracting investment. Quebec is very attractive for companies to come and establish parts of their operation at low cost with talent and creativity. And so we were pretty successful in doing that. And lastly, I would say taking down...
Hold on to that last point. We're going to take a brief commercial break. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Catherine Loubier. She, until recently, was the Delegate General for Quebec, province of Quebec, in New York City. Catherine, I had to interrupt you. You were talking about some of the various things that had been accomplished in your tenure for the province of Quebec in New York City. Please continue with your thought.
Well, the last point, and you brought up the Biden administration. Well, under the previous administration, we saw those aluminum tariffs coming back. That's important because it's 30,000 jobs in Quebec. It's a principal industry, job creator. So along with my friends at the embassy and the consulate and the consulates across Canada, we really had a very strong voice. We picked up the phone. We made close to 200 representations to elected officials to tell them they were auto-inflicting damages on themselves wanting to do that, that they would have to supply from other countries or regimes like Russia. And you know, the tariffs were taken down. And so I'm really glad we did that. And that's exactly the kind of action, concerted action and strong voice we need right now facing the Biden infrastructure bill.
I want to talk a little bit just on your last point about the collaboration that you have with the Canadian Embassy, with Ontario has a number of agents general in Washington, Chicago, New York City, et cetera. A lot of people wouldn't even know that there's this whole level of interprovincial and federal collaboration. I know that you folks have been working together on supply chains and the North American supply chain. So maybe just talk about that collaboration a little bit.
Yes, that's a good point. So Ontario has a senior representative in the US, and so does Alberta, my friends Ian Todd and James Rajat. And frankly, the ambassador, Kirsten Hillman in Washington, not only understands, of course, but is extremely active on the issues of trade as well with the White House and other, the Senate and so on in committee. So we were able to really form a Team Canada voice and go out there together and be very efficient in explaining and reaching out to Congress and the administration to explain why this is a bad idea for the Americans as well. So I would say that this collaboration was instrumental to our success with the aluminum tariffs, but we also defended some Buy American bills in New Jersey together, in New York. There was a bill also wanting to question our practices with boreal forest, which would have been quite devastating for many reasons for Canada. And BC was at the table with us as well for that file. So I think in the past it has happened, but I would say, but perhaps because of bringing us closer together during COVID, we've really been efficient in terms of provinces with the federal government to be active on the US side of things and making sure those supply chains stay open, that there's no more hurdle, that the temptation to go inward it has an opposing voice. I wouldn't say that we've succeeded to stop that trend, as you well know, but at least, we succeeded into making sure certain bills didn't go forward, were amended, and certain measures did not grow legs and hurt our economy, frankly, on both sides of the border.
Yeah, I think that this is an important point because, as you said right at the outset, the threat to our trade relationship hasn't gone away with President Trump not being reelected. It's still there. Is that right?
It is. And, preparing for our chat today, I was speaking with a number of U.S. ex-officials, including in the Office of the Secretary of Commerce. And the consensus I'm hearing and I thought is that there's a very toxic atmosphere right now, making the U.S. wanting to look inward. not sacrificing any US asset for any ally. So we are not in a world anymore where Canada, certainly, and Mexico were considered, partners in localizing and supply chains. I mean, what is in that infrastructure bill is really wide and is touching on a number of industry we thought were on the safe side, and more generally, thinking that by America, Canada would be exempt for a very long time. I don't think we're in that context anymore, and I find it extremely concerning. And I think that we have to be present. We have to have a strong voice. We have to be campaigning.
I'm going to have to cut you off again. Again, we've got another commercial break. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Catherine Loubier. Until recently, she was the Delegate General for Quebec, province of Quebec in New York City. Catherine, I had to cut you off again. Again, very important to the trade relationship and what you as Quebecers, what we as Canadians have to do to maintain that in very troubling times. Please continue with your thought.
Well, I was just saying, I mean, we have to explain to the U.S. side that, the measures they're putting forward, I mean, replacing or changing supply chains that have been in place since the Great War is not something you do overnight. And so some of the legislators might not realize, that 100% of cement in the north of New York is procured from Quebec, or liquid asphalt, and that aluminum, can come from Quebec, Canada, or other countries and regimes which they may not agree with their ideas of what a democracy should be. So I think I understand the aim. I think it's clear for everyone there, the inward movement and the desire to do all things American and create jobs in America. But I think that's going to be very disturbing and disrupting for supply chains, and it's going to kill competition to some extent and raise prices on Americans. And so it's going to do the contrary effect. But it's complicated. You have to be out there explaining that. Right. And I think, it's going to take a lot of explaining and strong voices to even poach into that or pierce into that bubble of protectionism that is being built, especially in that infrastructure bill.
Do you think that this should be an issue in the election campaign and the parties should be challenged to come up with their plans on how to deal with this?
Well, I mean, do Canadians wake up thinking about that? No. What I think is the timing of the election might be an issue because, you should not only be out there right now, but you should have the best task team, trying to speak to the American side. Instead of that, we have an election which will generate a transition period, right, which, as you well know, is long. And so before we get someone, efficient at foreign affairs or international trade, speaking to the Americans, it could take some time. So that's my big concern. In terms of issues, I mean, of course I would like it to be, but it's a bit convoluted. But if you talk to Canadians and about the agenda of the Liberals or the Conservatives or other parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives agenda is not that different. When you look at it, I think it's more an election on Justin Trudeau or not, right, Justin Trudeau, right, this time. So
interesting. Yeah. No, I see your point. Certainly on these trade issues, I think you're quite right for sure. Few differences on some of the other issues, but we'll leave them to describe that to Canadians a little bit more. I want to talk about Quebec society with you for a couple of minutes. My sense is that Quebec is becoming or has become more entrepreneurial. I know that part of the history of Quebec has been state power to protect the language, protect the culture. But do you see Quebec entrepreneurs really coming into their own?
I definitely see the Quebec economy was leading before COVID and now is coming back faster than the rest of Canada. I think there is a lot of pride that has been created by not taking the issues of language, protection of French and culture as negative, but rather as positive forces. Being proud of French and wanting to protect it is not only normal, but commendable. And I think, the current Premier of Quebec, Mr. Legault, has succeeded in sending that message to Quebecers that, it is okay to protect and want to, cherish what we have in terms of culture and language. At the same time, the number of times he talks about being proud of being Quebecer, I think is a positive force also. Certainly the economy first message of the Premier has been in the US, and I've been told that so many times, really well received. This is the number one priority. And it is not something else that could be more political and that could take away some of the capital coming in the province or discourage certain entrepreneurs to do more from Quebec. So definitely the context is positive and is upbeat. And we have extraordinary entrepreneurs in Quebec.
One more time, I'm going to interrupt you. Last time, but we'll be back after these messages for the final segment. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm Tony Clement here with Catherine Loubier. Catherine, again, these are more kind of existential questions a little bit. I hope you don't mind, but I always like to educate our viewers a little bit. Maybe it's something that they haven't really considered in the past about Quebec and how it relates to the rest of Canada. If I were to ask you what would be the most surprising thing that you can think of about Quebec to tell non-Quebecers, Canadians who don't reside in Quebec, what would that be?
That Quebecers are very welcoming and very creative and, are true citizens of Canada, thriving and connecting with the United States and other parts of the world, shining on the world scene with companies and talent. We have a lot to learn from each other and a lot of trade to do with each other also. There's a tremendous potential of interprovincial trade in Canada that we haven't tapped on. And so I think it's definitely a win-win for more Canadians to come to Quebec and vice versa.
Do you think that we can make some progress on interprovincial trade?
I think so. I think definitely. I mean, when you look at the potential is there. That might not be the first reflex for some of the entrepreneurs. There's different reasons for that, but I think if we put more efforts, increase in trade will create more jobs in Canada ultimately, and will build things to export on the other side of the border more efficiently. And Quebec also has a big green advantage right now, not only in terms of green hydroelectricity, but critical minerals, and other provinces do as well. But we have a big reserve of critical minerals, and we can really strongly establish ourselves in the industry of EV cars and EV vehicles, and I think that's would be important for Canada. Justin Trudeau invested his government into that. Different provinces are pushing this as well. Together, we can really shine on the world scene in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot going on, like you mentioned green energy and green solutions. Of course, one of the announcements pre-election was a new vaccine manufacturing facility that would be housed in Quebec as well. So there's a lot kind of happening there that will be beneficial to Canada's goals as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. We've got a strong aerospace industry as well, humongous aerospace industry. It's true that there's a new facility that will welcome the manufacturing of vaccines. That's extremely positive for Canada. So I know that there's potential to grow our exports in the US, but the potential in Canada should not be forgotten, and we need to do more together, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Was it fun kind of promoting Quebec culture in New York? Is that one of the fun parts of the job? Yes,
I mean, culture is they're our best ambassadors. This is it opens doors in an extraordinarily efficient way. New Yorkers love our culture. They love our artists, our events. Buyers from New York come to Quebec all the time to see what shows they could be purchasing and which talent. Moment Factory is in New York from Quebec. They are being very successful in the immersive, technology that they use to entertain. But we've got New York and Montreal is more connected than people can think. I mean, the previous economy minister equivalent in New York was a guy from Montreal. The number 2 at the Metropolitan Transit Authority, one of the largest in the world, was a guy from the north of Quebec. Montrealers are everywhere, and companies are helping build, buildings, charging stations. They're helping build those offshore wind towers.
Sure.
So it's amazing. In the almost 3 years I was there to see the connection between Quebec and Canada, but especially Quebec and New York City.
Unfortunately, our time is up. It's been wonderful to check in with you, Catherine Loubier, talk about Quebec and its role, not only in the US, but of course, all of us here in Canada as well. Thanks for joining our program.
Thank you, Mr. Clement.
That was another in a series of interviews we've had with provincial agents in the United States. We had the Alberta agent, we had the Ontario agent, and now the Quebec agent. Very interesting to get their views. I hope you enjoyed the program as well.